Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending and trusting me with sharing my knowledge and my opinions on the royal stars. Four fixed stars that are continually listed throughout history is having specific powers of eminence and leadership. And I knew since I started studying the fixed stars, I wanted to give each and every one their due because each one is so rich and so complex and so powerful. But I thought, why not start with the big flashy ones that people tend to know about? I think, especially now, in a time where power, I think, is on a lot of people's minds, particularly how to use it well, how to have it in such a disempowering time, or when so many people use their power so destructively. So, just a bit about me. My name is Chloe. I am a writer and astrologer who has been practicing with the fixed stars since 2019. And, since learning about them and getting that handful of information from Brady and a few extant sources, I just knew I wanted to share the fixed stars with others and help other people initiate into them with maybe less difficulty than I did, where I was just like, I guess I'm just going to try things out until I see what works. Um, and yeah, and it's like I said, I try to be responsive to my audience and hear what, sort of astrology content they're looking for. And I just noticed a lot of people wanting very concrete things. They want to switch careers. They want to move to their own place. They want to figure out their purpose. And I'm like, well, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm, not a real estate agent, but I do have these practices with the royals. And the more that I spend time with them and the more that I bring them into my life, the more I change, the more empowered I feel, and the more I feel like I understand power and myself. And so I wanted to share that with y'all. And yeah, hopefully you can leave here knowing more about the royal stars, getting an understanding for each of their powers and paths, as well as how to work with them. So I kind of just have here this tweet that I saw yesterday that feels very relevant. And yeah, it's a really terrible time to not believe in yourself because if you don't, it's really easy to just get caught up in hopelessness and despair and tumult. I mean, we're seeing so many examples from people in power where power is something abusive, where it's something that we take from people and that reinforces a hierarchy. And that's not my definition of power. I'm ever an optimist. It's like, I see, I see the people running our country, and all I really see is weakness. I see people out of alignment with themselves and the truth in the world. And that's the exact sort of thing I want to work against. I want people to step into themselves fully and have that be a benefit to the world because I truly believe you stepping into what you want and your desires will benefit others. Before I keep going, yeah, like I said, I'll keep checking in on the chat if there's any questions, but otherwise, there will also be time at the end, so not to worry. So, kind of a bit of what we'll go over today. Just who are the royals? What is their history? How do they come to us as this special group? What is the nature of their power as well as their unique qualities? How do you begin delineating them by placement? I'll get into that as well. What they tell us about our power. And I will conclude with a directional ritual that I use to attune to the royal stars. And also, if you're still kind of choosing which one, excuse me, to work with, then this ritual will be very helpful. So, briefly, who are the royal stars, right? So, they are four fixed stars singled out for eminence, and they are Aldebaran, the eye of the bull at 10 degrees Gemini, Regulus, the heart of the lion at 0 degrees Virgo, just recently changed over. It was at 29 degrees Leo for a long time. And then Antares, heart of the scorpion at 10 degrees Sagittarius, used to be at 9 degrees Sagittarius until recently. And then Fomalhaut, the mouth of the fish at 4 degrees Pisces. So, probably like many of you, I first heard about the royal stars through the work of Bernadette Brady and her book, Brady's Book of Fixed Stars. And in there, she tells us that, right, all of these four stars are quite special. Each one brings its own, excuse me. Each one brings its own unique type of life journey and lessons. Each one gives power and promises success, but only if you can deal with the particular hurdles that will be placed in front of you. Each star represents a specific type of human dilemma or weakness. The presence of any of these four stars in your chart will add a considerable amount of mythology to your life's journey. So there's a lot to this quote. There's a lot that it tells us about them. First of all, each royal star has a distinct type of journey and provides different life lessons. The way I kind of describe them to my clients in fixed star readings is they each highlight four facets of right rulership. There are great rewards to be gained in working with them, but only if you face certain obstacles head on. This is something I emphasize again and again. Stepping into your power, being a powerful person, in many ways is harder than not being a powerful person because there's more responsibility. There's a higher standard of conduct. It doesn't necessarily make your life easier, even if it does, in my opinion, make your life better. And there are inherently problems and inner frailties to contend with if you walk this path. This is not about always feeling powerful. This is not about always thinking that you're the best. It's about kind of being willing to change and having the humility to transform yourself into something bigger and better while still accepting that like you have everything you need. It's a gauntlet, to walk this path and will take many different facets, but the more I work with them, the more I really feel like they're great guides. Um, Finally, being touched by or working with these stars brings their powerful stories into your life. So a lot of people have asked me, it's like, I don't have any connections to the royal stars. Like, can I work with them? Is this class for me? And I'll just say, I have worked with fixed stars in my chart. I've worked with fixed stars not in my chart, and they're all powerful. You do not have to have a natal connection to be touched by them. There's more of a choice if you don't have them in your natal chart. Like if you don't work with them, they're just not part of your story. But I have not really felt much of a difference in magnitude or guidance based on natal connections. So just knowing that, like, regardless of your natal chart and your connections with them, working with them explicitly will bring their very powerful myths into your life. Okay. So, how they came to be. So, the history of the royal stars is kind of funny because it's kind of wrong. Like, it's basically in the 17th or 18th century, French scholars of Arabic translated a Zoroastrian text called the Zen Avesta, which mentioned four chieftain stars, which each ruled a quadrant of the sky. Um, they each ruled a certain quadrant of the sky and were said to sort of be these defenders of the universe against like evil forces. And then so these French scholars assumed that these four stars, Aldebaran, Regulus, Antares, and Fomalhaut, were these four chieftain stars because at the time that this text was written, they each corresponded their rising to the equinoxes and solstices. In actuality, the four stars that were the chieftain stars were Sirius, the constellation Ursa Major, the constellation Scorpius, and Fomalhaut. That is what Antares is a part of, Scorpius. So here you see that in actuality, Regulus and Aldebaran were not part of this Zoroastrian understanding of like chieftainness. And I'll also say the word royal was nowhere in this text. That was added on by these French scholars. So I just say that at the beginning, not to delegitimize them, because we have just practiced so much with the royal stars over hundreds of years that through that we have imbued them with this special power, right? And I just also call that out to highlight the power of practice. But yeah, I just think it's interesting that it's kind of a mistake. But nevertheless, they took up the gauntlet of royal, and working with them certainly accomplishes that goal. So, and then I'm an etymology nerd. I'm like, what does it really mean to be royal and powerful? Because I mean, royal is also such a loaded term, and that's also a question that a lot of clients come to me with is like, how can, so many people have royal stars in their chart. Not everyone is a king or a CEO or a celebrity. So if we look at, the root of royal, it comes from regal, right, which means to move in a straight line or direct in a straight line. right? There's kind of this ability to act, right? This straightforwardness, or there's certain cycle or legible journey you follow that comes with regalness. I think of like, what is a king but someone who can say, I want this thing to happen, and then it happens, right? And how we shrink that down into our life is, oh, I want this thing to happen, and I make it happen, regardless of the obstacles, regardless of what that requires of me. If it's really for me, then, it'll come. And then power too, as someone else who I think avoided stepping into power for so long because I thought it was destructive or domineering, power is just to be able to do something, right? These are just stars about like, allowing yourself to actually live and embody your desires and have that happen. And, so the more I started studying the royal stars, I definitely always want to add more than what is found out there. Even if you look on YouTube, there's plenty of introductory royal star courses, but I wanted to really spend time with them. Why are they so pivotal? Why are they worthy of this special designation? And the thing that just came back to me is like, right, they correspond to these like pivots, right? This cycle of the year, right? The whole reason they were highlighted by these French scholars was because of their position along the seasons, which I think we can all acknowledge are powerful turnings throughout the year. And you see this again and again with like in various, magical or just going out in the world, right? The four cardinal directions are always considered like points of power. Not only do we navigate by them, but, as this Dictionary of Symbols quote said, these pivots are the origins of life, the dwelling places of the gods and of the dead in the cycle of evolution. Like, no big deal. And right, if you're an astrologer, then you also know that the four pivots, which, correspond to the four directions, but it's just reversed. I'm not going to get into the technical shenanigans, but one of the first things you learn when reading a chart is that planets are along these four angles, the ascendant, the IC, the descendant, and the midheaven are the most loud and pivotal parts of your chart. And, if you've also done any magical workings, like how often do you call in the directions? Or literally face each one. And so the more I kind of tuned into this, it's like, oh, this is there's something cyclical happening with them. There's something about journeying and changing, but they also represent the points of initiation and entry. So Benabel Wen, who has an amazing book and translation on the I Ching, right, says the four directions and the four seasons represent four gates, right? And this is also something I've experienced doing magical work with Josephine McCarthy, who's great British magician. She has a free magical course that I highly recommend for anyone who wants to get serious on that. And in that work, what you do, one of the first directional rituals you do is you go around to each of the directions and you imagine a gate and you imagine opening the gate, and that is part of how you harness your power. And so that, right, seeing it that way, you can begin to see the royals as representing certain parts of a cycle. You can see them as involving a process. And there's also something about changing, right? Transforming into one thing and being able to harness that power to make something with your life. And I can keep going on this, but just tripping out on the four directions has been like my big thing for the past few months. And so, right, and so with that, you can also begin to map the correspondences of the royals, onto these pivots. Because in addition to being assigned to certain seasons, they are also each assigned a certain direction. And, as anyone knows, watching the sun rise and culminate and set and then disappear, each direction, each part of the sky, each pivot has a certain flavor. And so a lot of what I wanted to do with this class and with my larger course is really dig into what sort of actions or what sort of goals do each of these royals really help us with. So Aldebaran corresponds with East and the spring. What I sort of summarize the power of Aldebaran is earthly manifestation, right? The sunrise is an extremely important part. So many prayers and moments happen, when the sun meets the horizon. And what I really see with Aldebaran with that is the power to initiate, the power to bring something new, to break the earth and allow, yeah, something tangible to come about. And you also really understand that just by vibing with the animals of which, the constellations of which these stars are a part. Like, I mean, I had such revelations just like talking to my brother who knows nothing about astrology, being like, what's the bull like? What would you ask the bull for? And I know I really draw on like bull, the animal symbolism, when I study them or when I write essays about these stars. Right. So a bull is a working animal known for its strength and stamina, right? That is an essential part of Aldebaran is being able to go to work to make things happen. One of my favorite Manilius passages on this constellation describes Taurus natives as putting a yoke on their own shoulders first to lead the way. Right? This is a star that if you just need to sit down and work and put in the hours, then Aldebaran is your guy. Bulls are also known for being lusty, aggressive, and deadly. I mean, you may know the running of the bulls, where they incite a bull into anger with the intention of it maybe goring you. There's definitely like a fire. I kind of see Aldebaran kind of like a fiery furnace at times, where if it doesn't have certain boundaries placed on it, if it doesn't have a goal, it can be sort of destructive or in some ways overly greedy, which makes sense with just such a big land animal. But on the other side, bulls are also associated with cows, milk, nurture, the horns of the bull are often associated with the moon because they represent the crescent moon. So there's also this slow and steady manifestation, this ability to hook into a process over time and nurture it in a steady way. Aldebaran is a Venus-Mars star. So while it has that like fiery action to it, it also has this part that wants to relax and relate and connect with other people. Okay, Regulus then it culminates with the north and summer. I will say it's like sometimes Regulus I see is like with the north or with the south. It gets kind of tricky because like in a natal chart, like the midheaven, the highest part of the chart is the south. But just know that Regulus corresponds to whatever direction is the highest, right? And that really tells you a lot about Regulus, right? If you correspond it with the midheaven, right? It's the point of culmination. It is the self being fully itself and that being visible and bringing in attention and ideally rewards and accolades for that quality. So that makes sense with the lion. In some ways, the Regulus is the most royal of the royal stars because the lion is already known as the king of the jungle and is an emblem for the sun, royalty, light, confidence. And it's also just known for being a powerful animal. There is great power with Regulus. And it's like if Aldebaran power is more about like going out and doing something, the Regulus power is about like, who am I? How do I gather this? How do I bring it into coherence? And how do I share it with other people? There's also let's see, bellicose side to Regulus. There's pride, there's bloodshed, there's a sense of winners and losers. Even I mean, even the lion group being called a pride. There's definitely a battle of egos. I've definitely seen with many Regulus natives that like just you stepping into your power is going to bring about people projecting things onto you or wanting to tear you down. So that is a particular flavor of Regulus. Is there's kind of this contest quality of like you're being seen as visible, but you also have to prove yourself in some way. Are you truly embodying yourself? Are you worthy of these honors? And then another piece that is kind of more forgotten with Regulus and with lions is this thing of lineage and healing. I'm not really getting into them because that's not necessarily my area of expertise, but there's also specific archangels attached to the stars. And I believe Regulus is Raphael, who's known as like a healing angel. And you can kind of see healing here as like a sense of wholeness, right? If all of our body, if all of our mind is not in full connection with each other, then it's really hard to kind of step into that Regulus power. And then similarly, you can see lineage here as like your actual physical ancestors. And it also makes me think of how, in a lion pride, the female lions are actually kind of in charge of mostly everything. One of their jobs being to teach the young how to hunt and how to like work within a group. And I also see Regulus and lions is associated with like, yeah, like spiritual lineage. Like who are the people you're drawing from, knowing that like even though you are your full authentic self, like that light, that awareness still comes from something beyond you. And that's a really important thing to avoid. Yeah, some of the more difficult flaws or qualities that can come up with working with Regulus. And so Antares is a scorpion, right? And scorpions, like on, first base have pretty specific and intense associations, right? And you can see that too with Antares corresponding to the west, right, where the sun sets in autumn, which is when, the sun starts length shortening its days and things start getting dark, right? This is when the veil is thin, when death and letting go and sort of conquering down for the winter, or at least for the colder months, starts happening. And so, most cultures associate scorpions with hidden deadly dangers, right? Some even associate them with like the devil itself, evil itself, right? Because, they nocturnal, they're small, they're hard to miss, and they tend to like hiding in like our shoes and little tiny places. And so I think there can be a lot of, let's say, baggage attached to Antares as an Antares girly. There has to be some understanding of the difficult and dark parts of life because people are going to associate you with that regardless. There's also a strong fighting spirit and tenacity for being so small. This is a really powerful animal. I mean, in the sky, the Scorpius constellation chases after the Orion constellation, Orion being this big, powerful warrior who is then defeated by a scorpion sting on his ankle. So small but mighty. And then with that, I mean, protecting what is precious is also a huge thing with Scorpio. I mean, even thinking about like evolutionarily, a Scorpio is, related to lobsters and crabs. Like they used to live in the water, somewhere like soft and sweet, and then they moved on to dry land. So it's like they're really tough and hard about really soft, precious things, right? This is a heart, right? Similar to the lion. And just as, they have this tough exterior, they also shed it and become soft, right? In order to transform and become like the bigger version of themselves. And so transformation and like on a deep soul level is also a huge theme with Antares. Knowledge of the dark is another big thing. The kind of phrase I use for Antares here is underworld wisdom because there's certain things you can only know in the dark or without the clear light of intellect. There's something very feelings heavy and intuitive about how Antares works. And yeah, it makes me think too of just the idea of like, you have to just be more intimate with things. Things are much more emotional and fantastical in the dark. And so Antares, it's not about avoiding that, but it's like, how do you find wisdom and truth amidst all of these shifting emotional truths as well? And then, yeah, love and war. Um, on the one hand, right, the war side is very like apparent and kind of like Regulus. There's definitely going to be some foes or enemies, if not to defeat, then to work with or work around with this. But the more and more I spend time with Antares, the more and more I see this as like a very relational star. Just as you can only love someone that you can also hate, what Antares is looking for is someone who can go to the underworld with them, someone who they can go through all of the dark stuff and all of the deep truths and be closer because of that. A lot of the imagery I get when I vibe with Antares is like a heart covered in thorns and bleeding, right? It's like kind of through that that they know that they're alive. And that's kind of the eternal battle with, Scorpion Antares people is like when to defend, when to attack, and when to be vulnerable, when to let people in. Let's see. Someone is asking what it is when reading natal charts, do you find there is a difference between the traditional seven planets compared to the outer planets? Yeah, so it's rare that I will talk about outer planet conjunctions in the natal chart. uh, just because people born within a few years of you will also have, Pluto conjoined Antares or something. So that's going to speak more to like a generational shift than a personal shift, whereas the first seven planets with the royals is going to be much more keyed into you. So, I mean, honestly, I'll say like it's not something I've studied a ton, but you should. There's definitely something to the outer planets with the royals. It's just, yeah, not my area of expertise. Okay. Fomalhaut is the fish. Also corresponds with the south, the nadir. I kind of am been playing with it, with also seeing it related to the IC or the Imam Shayli, the lowest part of the chart. And then winter, right? A time where we are fully in the darkness, where a lot of life has sort of been what is the word has been shed from the earth, and we're kind of left with a bareness in this world. And so Fomalhaut says, okay, well, come to the world of dreams, come to this other world over here that is you can't see but is always with us at all times. Of course. So what do we associate with fish? On the one hand, wealth and abundance, right? They're set into the ocean, this place of plenty, and there's very much a strong association with Fomalhaut and like buried treasure. And something I find a lot with Fomalhaut natives, particularly with Venus, is they're like master thrifters. They can go into any junk or antique shop and find like the most beautiful treasure within. But that's the thing is, like I say here, there's a slipperiness to Fomalhaut. So the wealth and abundance here is not going to be as, active or productive or personally driven as with Aldebaran. It's going to be much more about like being like making yourself available to being helped and for kind of like out of nowhere boons to come your way, right? I think of like, the scale of the rainbow fish falling off into your lap. Sacrifice and surrender is also a big thing. I mean, right? Jesus, who is this figure of extreme selflessness, is also often associated with the fish. Um, and even just thinking of, its place in the whole, there's something really potent about this. And it's also, I mean, Fomalhaut gives us like a pretty distinct view of power that is much less right about us actively doing something, and it's more about how do we let go into something bigger. So that's what I'll say is like Fomalhaut natives or those who work with Fomalhaut, like their version of power is going to be quite different than the norm. But there's also a deep wisdom that comes from being in the depths, being in something bigger and dissolving like your small self to receive it. And so that is something that you find a lot, and it often comes with time. One of my favorite quotes about Fomalhaut comes from Anonymous 379, where he says that Fomalhaut delays the fruition of something, delays something coming to completion, but makes it more beautiful. Right. And so it's you're really playing the long game with Fomalhaut. You're flowing in the ocean, right, until you find the beautiful vision or dream or treasure that you've been searching for. And so imagination and otherworldliness is also a big fish thing. I mean, just anything floating in the ocean, really. It's in which comes with a certain amount of surrender and yeah, letting go of the small self. Oh yeah. Yeah, Mars and Fomalhaut is actually sounds kind of nice. I'm into it. I think, especially if you're a day chart, I can imagine that it can be a nice. It's like, oh, I can act by just like letting things
Ready
go
to know?
floating
No.
with things.
Cast is up there and see.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and then you know, with that, right, you can use these animal symbolisms. And, if you're thinking about what am I trying to do with them? How do I want to work with the royal stars? Yeah, what animal would you help to ask for with your purpose, right? With a sense of direction? Which of these four, the bull, the scorpion, the lion, or the fish, helps you move in a straight line with a strong sense of who you are? And yeah, and I'm just going to kind of go through these. If anyone wants to drop any of their answers in the chat, they can. Just for fun. And then security. Who would you call on for keeping things stable and, secure for a certain period of time, or whether that's financial or relational, right? That's how you can begin to pry apart too. What are the different forms of security and what sort of security do I want? Because, like, as an Antares girly, like, my version of security is probably going to be a wee bit different than, say, an Aldebaran person. Though I do have him with my Saturn, that's a different story. What stars would you help with romance, right? Are you just looking to date around and get back into flirting? Or are you looking to get married and, have a kid or, like build something with someone, right? That's very different stars for each. Where you can even ask yourself, like, how would each of the animals help with creativity, right? What sort of project would the bull bring about versus the lion versus the fish versus the scorpion? Are you trying to establish a certain routine? Are you trying to be more inspired? Are you trying to make a living off of your art? And then, yeah, community building. Who would you call upon for collective action to make friends around you, to start a club, to start a mutual aid organization? And yeah, honestly, I mean, yeah, a lot of it is there's no wrong answers. Just see, if there's a specific goal and you have a certain feeling, see what that star brings you. And then recognition, I mean, obviously Regulus could be big for that, but maybe you just want to be recognized by a few people. Maybe you want to feel a sense of recognition from the universe. Maybe that's more FOMO hot. But you see, it's, beginning to think about the specific dynamics of these and how, what sort of creature you would want to help on your journey, what sort of familiar. You can begin to understand the royal stars. So, another way that I have been understanding the royal stars is through the I Ching, which am not going to get a ton into because it's a whole divination system that can be kind of complicated. Um, but I had this really crazy moment a few months ago, when the first day I started Aldebaran, a ritual with Aldebaran and Ernest, I just suddenly got this brain blast of, oh my God, I can use the I Ching and these like base trigrams to like understand, the royals, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. So the I Ching is an ancient form of Chinese divination that derives its predictions from 64 hexagrams, hexagram meaning 6 lines, right, made up of broken and unbroken lines in different combinations. And so you can see from this table of the 64 hexagrams, they come from the combination of two trigrams, which are classical Daoist elements that are supposed to explain the fundamental nature of all matter. So to get number 43 here, it's the trigram for lake over the trigram for heaven. But basically, something else I really love about the I Ching is that the name I Ching translates to the Book of Changes, right? This is a not just a way of gathering wisdom and insight, but it's about moving with and finding power within the constant flux of the world. And I also realized studying Benabel Wen's book on the I Ching that each of these trigrams corresponds to a certain direction, like the royal stars. And so I was like, oh, can I find some insight, say, about Aldebaran from Thunder, the trigram Thunder that also corresponds with the East? And I found yes, very much so. And what I love too about studying these trigrams is that kind of further like the power of the pivots that the royal stars represents, right? They each sort of allow us to embody a certain sort of power. Each of these trigrams, the way that Benabel One describes them, they have certain actions and qualities. And she also prescribes like certain magical workings or powers to these trigrams as well. And so they're things to embody and work with. And so I thought if you want to understand how to work with the royal stars, right, begin working with these elements. So Aldebaran power, right, is the power of thunder, which just at first glance, intuitive, I'm just like, yeah, it makes total sense, right? Because what is thunder? But this powerful noise from the universe that brings us to life, right? I mean, so the chi quality, so all of these quotes come from Annabelle Wen. You're going to hear me talk about her a ton because her I Ching book has changed my life. She says that the quality of thunder is to arouse, to jolt, to incite, right? Which makes total sense because Aldebaran is the East, right? The point of initiation. Oh, I love this. I assume Raphael's an Aldebaran native. Affinity with lightning and storms. I mean, she literally mentions like the weather pattern corresponding with Aldebaran is thunder and lightning. And then I think that this like the idea of thunder and Aldebaran just makes so much sense because what working with Aldebaran just awakens you to like, okay, you have to do something, now do it, right? You have to begin something, do it, right? It's kind of there's this direct just like continually returning to action. How do you continually begin again and again? And right, one of the things, Thunder is also said to do is to awaken a sense of purpose or cause, right? This is what I need to do. This is the path that I need to go on, right? There's a strong, active, straightforward quality to this as well. And then some of the qualities that she associates with like Thunder people would be pride, right? Being good looking, successful, anxious, having good musicianship, quick tempered, talented. Right. And so you kind of see like a bit of the Mars and the Venus here, where it's like, right, if something doesn't go my way, I'm going to feel a certain way about it. There can definitely be some like frustration or some like, what's the right word? A little bit of brattiness with Aldebaran sometimes of like, I want it and I want it now. But it's because they have such a desire to make things and they know that through continually working they will build their talents, they will become a masters at whatever they desire. And you see that of course with Beyonce, who has a Paran to Aldebaran with her son, who I've made a few videos about her. I mean, you might not like her music, which I don't recognize, but she works, right? She puts in the work to everything she does. But something else, and this is something she's gotten criticism for, she's extremely collaborative, right? What she does, she wants to connect to other people, to other musicians, to music itself, right? Even especially with her last few albums for the Renaissance trilogy, right? She's not just writing Beyonce's country album, she is making a thesis statement about country music and blackness in America all at once. And so I like that too, with this divisive force with the intent to unite. There's kind of this needing to strike out on your own, maybe like start something new that's a little controversial, but you're doing it for the collective. And that's something that I really, really feel with Aldebaran. It's like you're not just building for yourself, you're building for your community, your family, for the people around you. And I mean, these other Aldebaran natives I mentioned also really embody that, right? Octavia Butler, who is this sci-fi writer who many of her books are about imagining better futures from the point of view of a Black queer woman. And she gets, in a very Aldebaran way, like she's very like practical about what that will entail. Like I remember first reading her book Parable of the Talents, and a lot of, her characters, right, had guns that they shot people with because that was the sort of world they lived in. She was not mincing words about like what work is entailed in making a better world. And that feels so Aldebaran to me. And then Harriet Beecher Stowe, I think, has Aldebaran on top of her midheaven, maybe. She's the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is an abolitionist novel that was popular in the antebellum South and was credited with being one of the causes of the Civil War. And so you see once again this divisive force, this inciting to war, in order to bring about right greater union, right, to bring back the union and also to to end slavery and hopefully like bring about greater equality. And so I think of those people a lot when I think about like Thunder 2 being this like all pervasive thing that everyone can feel, has no source, pervades everything. And so Aldebaran gives us, right, the power to put your head down and work, create something in the material world. And it doesn't have to be, it can be writing, it can be music. It's just something, you're manifesting something outside of yourself, benefiting others from your efforts, right? Even just in the fact of like bringing, making dinner for your friends feels so Aldebaran to me. And then manifesting beauty, right? Manilius says of the Taurus constellation that in their face dwells the boy god Eros, right? There's something amorous, there's something about, creating a world that is not just, you know, something that you've built and worked on, but enjoying yourself. Delbarn wants you to work hard and play hard. And if you can't enjoy the simple things of life, then he's not really interested in the journey. I'm just gonna check on the chat for a bit. I said, I wonder if this reveals some kind of correlation with the Western and the animals of Chinese astrology. Yeah, I think that's definitely something to look into. I know that each of these trigrams also corresponds with one of the Chinese elements, like metal or wood. I know thunder is wood, and there are specific animals that correspond with that as well. But that would be a very, very interesting project as well. There's really so much to explore. Let's see. Claire Comstock Gay's astrology book uses the rock as her example as a quintessential Taurus figure because they're masculine fighters and they're preening in a campy femme way. Yes. Wrestling is also play fighting. They're against each other and colleagues. Yes. I love this because Aldebaran is not a fighter, really. Like he has a lot of power, and like if something is in his way, he's like, let's deal with that. But this is not like a path that's necessarily about contention. This is about gaining your power and without, yeah, neglecting, the fun, beautiful parts of life. You know, Ardra, yes. I don't remember. That's another thing. Aldebaran is also an indicator for the Rohini nakshatra. So I get so into the lunar mansions in my course with these guys. There's just so many connections with them. It's like how do I keep track of them all? How do I sum them all up? So Regulus power is fire. And fire here is not this, destructive blazing thing, right? It's like the sun, right? It's something core, it's essential, it radiates. There's a sense of clinging, right? It draws things in, kind of like a moth to a flame. And there's kind of this like essential clarification with fire. It's like I almost imagine like the fire element here being like this light inside us that burns with like our pure essence. Fire to me is like it reminds me too of like right the idea of enlightenment, which literally means like snuffing out a candle, but it comes from this idea of being, seeing the truth, your true nature, the nature of the universe. And so one of the things that Regulus power is about is there's this strong wisdom, clarity, being able to see yourself and things as they actually are. You see that too with some of the chi qualities associated with fire being logical reasoning or technical know-how. There's an intelligence part to this that I think people don't necessarily see with Regulus, but it's the intelligence of someone who knows themselves, understands how things work, and isn't trying to push against that. Whereas Aldebaran is going to be much more like, I just want to make this happen. Regulus is like, I have to act in alignment with what is true, whatever that means for you. Fire also blazes bright, right? Attracts attention. So there's also a quality of public recognition, accolades, promotion, which yeah, once again is a contrast to Aldebaran, who's not so much about the rewards, but Regulus is like, no, I want to be seen and recognized for these things that I do really well. And that's kind of where you get into like the winner loser like contention part of it. There's a competition, right? And even if you're just competing with yourself, you're trying to, yeah, be the best version, be better than X, Y, and Z, which yeah can bring about you have to sharpen your blade. You have to be willing to like defend yourself or like almost, yeah, prove your worth. And that's why you see some of the people associated with fire are not just intellectuals and students and wise people, but soldiers, right? Those who, yeah, like a sword, like a sword here is not just something destructive. You think of a sword's ability to cut through delusion to the heart of things. Like that is kind of what Regulus is really about. And then, right, to shape the world in your image is a big thing that I really see with Regulus. It's like, not only do I know my truth, but I am going to impact my kingdom and help other people sort of embody that too. Like I think of that with Lyndon Johnson, who was the president after JFK was assassinated and then won re-election in a landslide. And he has a very ambivalent legacy where on the one hand, he is a huge reason we have so many of the social services we have today. He's the creator of Medicare and Medicaid, helped usher in a lot of the civil rights bills, but he also is the one that dragged out the war in Vietnam, which was a mistake for many reasons. So you see that on the one hand, he was very wise and kind of ahead of his time, especially for like a lot of like white politicians in terms of like bringing goodness and good ideas to the people. But he also like had that, Regulus war hawk side of like, well, we're gonna like prove ourselves by defeating these enemies. And yeah, we all know how that went. And then, right, a big thing you see with Regulus is, right, the acclaim comes through authenticity. It comes through being yourself, knowing who you are, and sharing that with you, knowing the risk and the dangers that come with it. So Jim Carrey has this Star on Your Midheaven, and I remember, in this movie, he has this one moment where like he's just starting in stand up, and like every night before he goes to bed, he just keeps asking himself this question. He's like, "What do the people want? What do the people want? What do the people want?" And then one day he wakes up and he goes, "Oh, I know what they want. They want to be free from concern." Right, with this idea of, you walk into if you're going to see a comedian, you want to feel that they are so confident that they don't care if you're there or not. They already know that they are the shit. And that feels very Regulus as well, of like, I know who I am, I'm confident in that, and that is what brings the people in. And then I also, Franz Liszt also has a Regulus connection. I forget what. He's a very famous pianist who was known for basically uh, kind of being like the Beatles of his time, where all of his, fans would come in and swoon and faint and be so taken by his music and his creations that they can barely contain themselves. Um, yeah, so Regulus is clarity, truth, authenticity, shaping the world in your image. And knowing all of yourself, right, also involves healing and dealing with the body stuff. I mean, Regulus came into my life and then he's like, "Okay, you're going to deal with your food allergies and your endometriosis, and then we can work on the rest of the stuff." I went, "Great, cool. I'm for it." Okay. Antari's one is interesting. Okay, I'm gonna just read the chat. Seal has Regulus in his chart. Was getting buried and unacknowledged in his early career, almost failed, became a huge person because one person heard Kiss from a Rose, a song that's never not been huge since. Yeah. I mean, there is a sense of Regulus, like you kind of have to know you're the shit before other people do. Otherwise, I don't know, you're just gonna be like JD Vance, who has like I think Regulus on his ascendant and is just like the dumbest little baby I ever have seen in my entire life. Also very Charlie. Also very Charlie. Okay. Antares and Lake. So this is an interesting combination because at first it doesn't make sense, right? Because Lake is known for being nourishing and relational and good for business. It's like a very joyous trigram. And Antares is this powerful warrior. But the way Benabel describes it is she does compare Lake, the archetype of Lake to the warrior, because she says that the best warrior is not outwardly irascible or chaotic or destructive, right? They're placid on the surface, like a lake. You don't know what they're feeling or what they're doing until they've already done it, which honestly also feels very Scorpio and like Mars and Scorpio. It's, this is not the bombast of Regulus, of this is who I am. It's I know who I am, and you're only going to see what I want you to see. And with that, it's also kind of telling us that even though part of the Antares story is facing foes, there's also something here about cultivating magnanimity and being able to put down the blade and the defenses at some time and let other people in. So there's a nourishing, sustaining force to Lake. I mean, just even just what a lake is, you see it with this trigram. It's like a yin line, which is seen as like receptive and changeful, right below two yang lines, which are active and foundational and strong, right? It's like the surface is mutable, but there's deep, deep power underneath. And one of the interesting things that I found in my Antares research is this is a star really associated with like saving seeds for winter. Like one of its Babylonian names is literally like Lord of the Seed. And there's this story of this death god, Yima, who, in anticipation for a great winter overtaking the earth, took the seeds, right, of all of these plants and hid them in the earth so that when spring came about again, they could be born again. And so that's something that I have you consider, knowing that like Antares is a lot about like death and rebirth cycles. It's not about throwing everything away. It's about nourishing, sustaining what is worth lasting through the winter, what is actually worth saving. Winning legal matters and/or negotiations is part of Lake's quality as well, which also feels very Antares. There can be a sense of winning or losing or like being in contention. And honestly, sometimes it's even more interesting when Antares loses. There's also an exchange of energy, right? I really like this sort of like mutual joy, which can be mutual destruction as well. There's a real sense of like the way Antares wants to relate is like bare heart to bare heart. And, it kind of reminds me of the second decan of Scorpio, for those of you who know it, which Austin Coppock calls like mutual distillation. It's about like, if there's this complete, connection between us, nothing is hidden, that can lift us up and help us grow, or it can drag us down. And so there's always that ambivalence with Antares. And yeah, I mean, I could I could say a lot about this with Taylor Swift, but I will not indulge you in my weird pop culture spirals right now. And then another thing I found interesting is, like Antares, there's a really strong intellectual component to Lake. It's said to make someone a good writer or orator, but also someone who likes to gossip, which, as an Antares person, I can confirm. But there, the talismanic qualities of Antares include to not like to give someone a good memory and not just to make someone wise, but to make someone appear wise, which, some of my friends are like, what does that mean? That seems so superficial. But the way I see it is like, it doesn't matter if you're wise, if no one thinks you're wise, if no one consults you. And so that's also part of the relational quality of Antares is like, people have to like, if not like you, then respect your opinion to ask for your advice, to give you power, or to, ask for your consult. And so what does Antares give? The power to face the dark and survive. There's pretty much always going to be some sort of like darkness or underworld journey for Antares people. And it's about, right, accessing that sort of wisdom that can only come through facing the gauntlet, through going through these forces of creation and destruction. Acting with composure against all foes. Whereas I feel like Regulus is much more about like challenging it. In some ways, like Antares has to, right, sometimes act like a lake and put the sword down. Sometimes avoiding the foe or keeping your composure and just keeping doing you is the best way to approach this. But, a lot of what uh, Antares is about is just the pure grit and audacity to do what you need to do, facing all odds. And so it's more about continuing the work, continuing it, and just knowing that, yeah, obstacles will come about, but you will not be deterred. And then, yeah, to be transformed by your relationships, to really be touched by the world, despite the fear, despite the loss that comes with relationships. Like, I think a lot about how Antares has to do with the West, which is also where the descendant is, which is the house of the other in astrology. And it's also one of the houses of death. So, what are relationships but small deaths of ceding my control and sense of self to something bigger? And so, I think that's part of why Antares is kind of scary, is like being with other people can be transformative for better or for worse. Let's see. Sarah's asking about Antares. Is hearsay or misinformation a potential consequence of the gossip part? Yeah, I definitely think so. I think on both sides, both for Antares people, this is something I've definitely experienced, is just like accepting that I'll be misunderstood on some level. But I think that's something else to note for Antares because, right, the wisdom of Antares is very subjective, right? It's in the dark. It's not seeing things clearly like Regulus. This is, and from what I see and what I feel, I'm going to act. And so there's definitely a monitoring with this star of, okay, like, is this a real like issue to deal with, or am I just sort of making something up because I don't know, I have a weird beef with this person, right? There's a lot of like sifting through one's like projections and unconscious biases with Antares. Okay, and then fomal hot power is associated to me with the trigram of water. And here you even see it. I like the way that this is laid out. You have, a broken line sandwiching, what am I trying to say? It's two unbroken lines sandwiching an unbroken line. It's almost like the water dissolving the solid thing. And here, water is a bit scarier than how we see the element in the Western zodiac, right? It's associated with the moon, which makes sense, right? Controlling the tide. But it's water here as like a deep, deep roiling ocean, right? It's abyss, danger, and risk. I mean, one of the riskiest things you could do back in the day was go on a boat and be in the middle of the ocean. It's still a crazy, weird place that I do not ever want to go. Um, but with that, there's the arcane and the occult. There's certain knowledge that can only come from surrendering to the deep. And interestingly, career success is part of this too. Like there's something about like following the flow of things and being able to like land yourself in a place of abundance. And then it's a flowing, shifting, indefinite force, right? This is Fomalhaut is not, necessarily facing one direction or in charge of the path. It's about flowing with. And again, something that I see with Fomalhaut natives and the power of Fomalhaut is collective action. You are not just working for yourself, you are working on behalf of the collective. Like Fomalhaut royalty kind of reminds me of like back in the day when the king was seen as like, the emissary of God, right? Supposed to act on behalf of all the people. Like there's also a visionary quality to it as well, right? They hold certain knowledges or certain visions for the future that is very charismatic and compelling to us. Some qualities associated with water people would be great deep emotions and intensity, pensiveness and melancholy. I noticed that a lot too because a lot of Fomalhaut power is learning how to wait up the pregnant pause, which can give one time to think about things and reflect on things. But right, it is that esoteric knowledge that can only come through continually opening and returning to the source that Fomalhaut holds. And this is not just like spiritual, it is creative, it is magical, right? It is inspiring. I mean, I think of Martin Luther King Jr., who has Fomalhaut and Paran with his Venus, right? So tuning it particularly to his relations and other people. And like, yes, part of the reason, he is such a pivotal figure is, the boots on the ground work he did for the civil rights movement. But, one of the first things we learn is his I have a dream speech, which is I have a dream of a black child and a white child holding hands together, right? There's something extremely Fomalhaut about that, where it's not just this, heady, like, intellectual. It's like, I imagine this concrete thing coming to life. And it was extremely inspiring, still learning about it today. And I'll also say, like, his, being assassinated and being this, like, martyred figure is for better or for worse, also very Fomalhaut. Some other Fomalhaut people, John Coltrane, who is an extremely talented jazz musician. He's was married to Alice Coltrane, who's this visionary harpist who I really love. And one of his most famous songs has the, refrain of "Love Supreme," right? There's this continually turning towards spirit and oneness and compassion. And then I also put Kylie Jenner here to kind of show like a kind of more negative side of Fomalhaut of like literally illusions, right? I mean, she made $1 billion with her cosmetic company selling these like lip treatments, all while, getting lip fillers, and I mean, which is also so fish, right? Having like these big fish-like lips and selling this dream of beauty that is an illusion, right? And I'll get into it, but that is definitely something to note with Fomalhaut is like you kind of have to be in like the dreamy morass, but that can definitely like yeah, have you kidding yourself a bit. Okay. Now we get into, let's see, is there another question? Um, Addison Rae has Fomalhaut conjunct her MC. I see that so much. I mean, she has the song Aquamarine, Dive in Me. Yeah, yeah, that's very Fomalhaut. Um, uh, no, thank you for sharing. It makes me feel like, like, okay, people are following, like we're coming along. It's great. I love to yap at people and toward people. Anyway, delineating the royals. Did I do this? Oh, no, I did this out of order. Okay. So there are two ways, to tell if you have a royal star in your chart. The first, which is much easier, is natal conjunctions. You can look at other aspects. I don't just because, I mean, there's so many stars. You really just want to focus on the really tight conjunctions. Like you can't really see it that well here, but I have Lady Gaga's chart up here. She has her Saturn at like 9 degrees, Sagittarius, and Antares is basically right on top of her. So that would be a natal connection with Antares. And then the second is with this, other star planet relationship system called Parans. It is much more complicated. You can find your parans on astro.com. Which is also complicated, but I have the directions spelled out in my free fixed star index, which you can find on my website. You can download a PDF of it. I highly recommend looking at your parans. It opens up a completely different view of, yeah, just like so many other stars. And yeah, something I'm trying to, figure out is like, what are the different feelings of like, oh, sorry, my cat just knocked over a table. Um, she's feeling the power. But yeah, with the conjunctions versus parens, how do they show up differently? And right now, my kind of working theory is conjunctions feel much more tangible and immediate. Like I feel like if someone has a conjunction with a star, it's going to be much more like immediately visible versus parens feel much more kind of like deeply rooted and pervasive, but I'm still playing with that. But yeah, so you can quickly tell if you have any placements conjunct these royal stars by just, yeah, looking at their natal degrees. So, if something is within like 8 to 12 degrees Gemini, it would probably be near, considered touched by Aldebaran, like 28 degrees Leo, maybe 27 to, 2 degrees. But I'll also say the royals are so strong that sometimes I do use a bigger orb. Like one of my friends has the moon at like 25 degrees Leo, so like a bit past the 2 degree orb for Regulus, but is such a Regulus person that I'm like, okay, there has to be something here. Um, yeah, so Antares, yeah, 8 to 10, 8 to 12, 2 to 6 for Fomalhaut, but use your judgment as well. I am not very prescriptive about this stuff. I'm like, so I have 8 degree Sagittarius Sun conjunct with Antares. Yes, definitely, definitely counts. Is there anything else I wanted to say here? Yeah. But like I said, you do not need any sort of connection with these stars to feel an affinity with them. But what does it mean, right, to have some sort of natal connection with them? So, whatever planet or placement the royals touch, oh, really quickly, the placements that I always look at are the seven traditional planets, the angles. So, if you like, it's going to be really important if you have one of these stars conjoined the ascendant, the descendant, the IC, or the MC. I do also look at the nodes and I do look at the lots. I notice such like there's so many times where I was like looking up someone being like they seem so Fomalhaut or they seem so Antares and they had one of these stars like directly conjoined like their lot of fortune or lot of spirit. Like I think Timothy Chalamet has like Aldebaran on his lot of fortune and I'm like of course you do. Oh yeah, so Ilka said I have a lot of spirit right on Regulus. Yes. Especially with Regulus. Oof, that is I'm excited for you. I feel like that is a really potent combination. But yeah, beyond that, right? I don't follow everything. I don't, I use asteroids not a ton. Look for yourself. That's what I say for most of these. There's so much on the royal stars, on the fixed stars in general that have not been explored. So someone has to learn. Antares Jupiter, I really like that one. Megan the Stallion has that. So does James Baldwin. Um, I get into both in my class. It is, yeah, getting into like the different like combinations of like the royal stars with the planets has been so fun and so illuminating. Let me go back. So yeah, so what does it mean? Yeah, so each planet or placement the royals touch is imbued with special gravity and the potential for great achievement. There may be more responsibility put on the placement with more potential pitfalls along the way, right? There's more to do when you're a royal. And then the core meaning of the planet becomes woven into your story of power. Its qualities are part of how you unlock your royalty. Okay, so for this, oh yeah, and then another thing to consider is pay attention to the planetary nature of the star. Planets are strengthened by the stars that share their nature. And this comes from, I think, an Alberuni text where he says, like, like Mars with Antares is like a supercharged Mars. So for Regulus and Antares, Mars and Jupiter in Paran conjoined them are considered especially potent. For Aldebaran, it's Mars or Venus. And for Fomalhaut, it's Venus and Mercury. And, it's just, yes, don't sleep on the stars, conjoin lots or angles, tend to be very powerful. Yes, I just said so. Thank you, Chloe. Okay, so I'm going to get kind of into like the general strokes of what each of the planets with the royals generally look like. So, like I said, I get into the nitty-gritty with my course, which I'm very excited for. So, with the moon, with the royals, your sense of power and imminence is often related to the body, the physical realm, the common people, like the people in general, and emotions. And I mean, Dolly Parton is such a great example. She has her moon on top of Regulus, and she is known not just for being an amazing singer, but for right being, coming from this humble background and then giving back so much to her community, right? She's donated like countless books to increase childhood literacy. She built Dollywood in her hometown to bring in more jobs, but she's materially helping the people around her, right? That is part of her power. And then on the other side, we have Gwyneth Paltrow, who has Aldebaran with her moon. And though she first came up as, right, obviously being part of this acting dynasty, being an actress herself, she's really gained power and acclaim through building this wellness empire, Goop, and selling people, particularly probably like, bored rich white women, this sense of power and control over their health in like a chaotic world, which feels very like Aldebaran for better or for worse. But like her power comes from like, let me take care of your body and, make you feel okay. Ooh, yes. I will always look you as low-key Regulus with Whitney. Yes. Yes. I love that as well. And also like so like Regulus of Dolly Parton, she came up with like I Always Love You and I think Jolene in the same day. That's how the myth goes. And if that is not like shows you the divine enlightenment of Regulus, then I don't know what does. So Mercury with the royal stars is going to have your intellect, your skill, a sense of exchange and communication be part of it. So this first person I have up, Isaac Chotiner, is a New Yorker interviewer who, if you've seen like any of those interviews with like with like the like former Israeli ministers or like this recent like author of like a book of liberalism who's like friends with Henry Kissinger, he's known for like giving very robust gotcha interviews to very like out of touch politicians. Like there's literally people call it like getting Chotnered because he's just such a like ruthless interview and it's kind of like a joke of like do not agree to an interview with him unless you like want to be like publicly humiliated. And then Abraham Lincoln has Antares and Fomalhaut with his Mercury. And obviously, he's a very complicated man. I'm not here to sing the praises of Abraham Lincoln, but I mean, he was known not just for being a president, but he was a very, very strong orator. I mean, we still quote the Gettysburg Address, and a lot of political commentators I follow still quote his speeches. Um, Okay, so Venus is going to bring one's relationships, beauty, and creativity and art into one's power and imminence. So we see that very much with Frida Kahlo, who has Fomalhaut with her Venus. I mean, obviously, she was this beautiful, surreal painter, but a big part of her legacy is also her, contentious relationship with fellow artist Diego Rivera. And then Cheryl Lee has Venus with Aldebaran. This is a really interesting one. She is the actress who played Laura Palmer in Twin Peaks, the David Lynch series. And she was actually just supposed to play a cadaver in the first episode. She was not supposed to ever be part of the show alive. But, Lynch was so taken by her performance that, he not only, kept, included her in the rest of the series, but had a whole movie about her, Fire Walk with Me. And so, like, the story of Laura Palmer is this, like, right, this prom queen in this small town who lives this double life as, like, a, traumatized, drug addicted sex worker. And that feels the very, like, Venus and Mars side of Aldebaran. But it's like, a lot of the show is unraveling like, who are all the people she was relating to? Like, like, what was this core destruction and sadness in her life? Yes, exactly. She was the show. Yes, she was like, and that's her power, right? And David Lynch, rightly so, identified that in her and allowed her creativity to benefit us all. The sun is going to bring in our personal identity and insight as well as visibility. Walt Whitman, a poet famous for the line, I contain multitudes, has his son with Aldebaran. And then Judith Butler, a theorist and writer, author of Gender Trouble, has it with Fomalhaut, where the whole book is basically like dissecting how our identity as it comes to gender is this performance that we're constantly reifying, which I find very funny with Fomalhaut, which is right a very like diffuse, selfless royal. So it's like their sense of identity with the star comes from like problematizing and like dissolving our sense of identity. Okay. So Mars with the royals is going to make our conflicts and our courage and our audacity part of our power for better or for worse. So Ariana Grande has her Mars with Regulus. She has her Mars at 0 degrees Virgo. And I definitely notice a big difference between like Virgo Regulus people and Leo Regulus people. And so for, obviously, right, she's known for being like a very Venusian person, right? A beautiful singer. But she's also very much known not so much for her relationships, but for her difficulties or for the breakups that she has been in or maybe caused or been a part of. I'm not here to cast blame on anyone. But I mean, I'll also say, I mean, so much of her story is about like working through the trauma of like, right, having a bombing happening at one of her concerts or, her ex dying of a drug overdose and people like coming after her. And I think of, I mean, one of her most successful albums, Sweetener, was about her dealing with the difficulties of her life and facing that head on. And I think the more that Mars Royal Star people can kind of lean into that, like the more success they got. Like we kind of want you to go there. And then on the other hand, we have Clarence Thomas with Aldebaran. And for those of you who don't know, he is a Supreme Court justice who seems to be run solely on spite. He seems to have a lot of grievances against the world, particularly the civil rights era, as a black conservative man, and basically wants to make America suffer because of it. So, yeah, and I mean, we're certainly seeing it now with this lawless Supreme Court. They're being very martial. They're breaking the rules, basically dissolving the Constitution in front of him. And for better or for worse, like that is that is powerful. Okay, Jupiter with the royal stars makes our wisdom, our generosity, and our friendships, part of, our royal story. Venus, it's much more intimate and romantic. Jupiter, it's much more about community or friends. So Megan Thee Stallion has her Jupiter with Antares, and I think she's such a potent Jupiter example because, I mean, in typical Antares fashion, she has been through so much that is not her fault at all. I mean, not the death of her mother, but, being shot in the foot by this Tory Lanez loser, and then also having all these people deny that it happened. She was a victim and then suddenly she became, the source of all of this controversy. But through it all, I mean, part of the reason she's so easy to stand is because she seems like such a like generous-hearted person who doesn't want to hurt other people. That feels very Jupiter. And I mean, she's also known for being friends with all the other rap girlies. I mean, her collaborations with Cardi B are kind of legendary at this point. But it's like the thing that keeps coming up is like through all these hardships, she seems to maintain a really beautiful wisdom. And we see that too with F. Scott Fitzgerald, who, right, author of The Great Gatsby, which is all about like, right, this man accumulating wealth, for the sake of someone else, right, to bring the woman of his dreams for him, and like a lot of his work is sort of a critique of the excesses of the time and the vapidity of it, and like just the hollowness of money, which feels very like Jupiter Regulus vibes. Okay, Nivedita asks, how are planet combinations different from angle vibes? So yeah, I mean, this is something that I get into a bit with my class. I'm still trying to figure it out, but it's just more like I tend to find, honestly, planets conjunct the angles, kind of like heliacal rising and setting stars. They're much more pervasive. Right? Like I find it really hard to like encapsulate like a Regulus ascendant or Fomalhaut MC person because it's like it's how they do everything. Like it's not just relational. It's, like if it was with your Venus, it's like your whole public image and your whole sense of career is tied up with this star. So yeah, I think there's something more pivotal about them. And I think the same is true for like, right, a star on your descendant is going to impact your relationships and the people you connect with. And I see like your home and your roots. And so yeah, there's going to be more of a guarantee that it's like very prominent and loud. Um, okay, so Courtney is asking a good technical question. With Regulus, when looking at your natal chart, should you refer to where it was when you were born or where it is now? Where it was when you were born. And this was honestly like one of the more difficult parts about like doing research for chart examples. Because like if someone is born in like the 1800s, like the Regulus is not going to have the same orb that it did then. I think it's going to be at like 26, 27. So definitely look at where it was when you were born. I recommend AstroSeek. They have a whole like fixed star program where you can look up the degrees of each of the stars for a certain year. It goes all the way back to 1800. And then you can also program it that it shows you which fixed stars you have conjoined your personal planets. Okay, great. And then Saturn. Saturn with the royals is interesting because kind of like Mars, it makes one's struggles and obstacles part of the story, but it also adds a maturity, a gravitas, a timelessness to one's power, and a legacy. So it tends to get better with age is such a thing. So Arthur Schopenhauer, who is a philosopher, has his Fomalhaut with Saturn, and he didn't start writing philosophy or writing his books until his 50s. So there's definitely a sense of like, yeah, things get better with time. And also, versus something like the moon, which is much more on something like temporary or timely. Uh, Saturn with the royals is about creating things that last a long time and stand the test of time. Like, I feel like Lady Gaga, I mean, is a kind of good example of this. Obviously, she's still alive. She's like, I think, not even 40. But, she's been creating music since her early 20s. And she though she like is constantly transforming and doing new and interesting mature things, like she's not staying in the meat dress era, that stuff still holds up, right? It's not just seen as some uh publicity stunt that meant nothing. Like it's still like, wow, she's still iconic for that. And part of that is because she's not clinging to it. She's in reference to her past, but she's creating something more and mature. I mean, going into, film, she, won an Oscar. I mean, she's a really, really great example of like what a Saturn and Royal Star combination can look like. Okay. Um, do you consider lunar mansions with the fixed stars also relevant? So if I understand, then yes. I mean, in my course, I got into the lunar mansions attached to each of the royal stars because I just find they add so much rich information. Um, in terms of like natally, or like say you have like your moon in like Antares lunar station, even if it's not directly conjoined, like yes, I also think that's relevant and you should look into that as well. I wish there was more I could say. I am not a huge expert, but I love the nakshatras so much. But I definitely think they're relevant. Okay, so power according to the royal stars. Here I'm going to get kind of more broad and big about what do they teach us about power and embodying it. So a big thing is, right, the power as homecoming. And I feel like this is, I mean, it's a big lesson with all of them, but I mean, I think particularly with Regulus in the sense of coming back to who we always were. I think it was or the Oracle of Delphi, right? The phrase on front translates to know thyself. In Eihei Dogen, who's a Zen master, says to study the Buddha way is to study the self, right? Power is not about making yourself into something you're not or destroying you. It's about becoming more of who you are, right? Venabel Wen says the oracle, right, which is kind of seen as the unnamed wise person who directs the I Ching. The oracle doesn't teach you a particular set of doctrines. Rather, the oracle reveals to you what you believed all along. It clarifies your truth, and it does so by compelling you to solve its riddles. So I'll just say, like, a lot of working with the royal stars is just continually drawing them in and seeing what happens and what they bring your way. And a lot of it might just be, okay, before you do anything out there, like, we need to get good with you. Like, what part of you are you not seeing, or do you need to, yeah, accept more? And I'll say, like, Fomalhaut as homecoming also feels like coming back to your original face, coming back to your connection with everything and how you are an emanation of the Godhead. Yeah, coming home to who we always were. That is, I mean, that is to me what I want to impart and what I want people to really learn from the royal stars is like, you're not going to become royal trying to be someone else. Similarly, there is great burden. with power, which I think I've emphasized, but I'll get into more specifically, right? Each of these royals comes with a nemesis, which, if engaged with, will lead with a fall of grace. There's a risk here. There's a certain conduct that you have to hold on to you have to hold on to here, to be worthy of it. This is power is an initiation here. So for Aldebaran, it's breaking codes or basically like not honoring your oath to other people or having a certain code of ethics that you follow. And to me, that's kind of like the guardrails that this strong, fiery furnace of a star needs, because otherwise it's just going to be like creating like empires and like destroying. Like I think Cecil B. Rhodes, who is the founder of the De Beers Diamond Company and also one of the founders of Rhodesia, which is now like South Africa, like, white guy who came in and colonized South Africa, has Aldebaran like in conjoined one of his planets. And it's like, that's what happens when Aldebaran doesn't honor other people or have a code of ethics. Like it creates, but for whom and at what cost? For Regulus, it's revenge. And this is something that I tell my Regulus clients all the time. You're going to want to seek vengeance against people who start petty squabbles or try to tear you down. And in some ways, you wouldn't be wrong, but it's not about being right here. It's about being the bigger person. I think of like Regulus is also a heart star. One Babylonian text says that if the heart of the king does not rejoice, then the whole kingdom suffers. You being the bigger person, having magnanimity, not stooping to the level of like, someone who's jealous of you is the real test of Regulus power. Right? Where it's like, it's not about right, not about being right. It's about, being the king. For Antares, it's obsession. And this is kind of like something that I know very well. When you get too into, when you think that constant creation and destruction and letting things die and being kind of addicted to intensity sort of makes you forget that, oh, there's some things that we can preserve. There are some things that are worth saving. And also, like, things don't have to be intense all the time to be alive. Like, you can just chill out sometimes. And it's really about the discernment to know, like, when do I need to like initiate some cycle of change and when do I just need to like keep doing what I'm doing? And so for Fomalhaut, as I mentioned before, the nemesis is delusion, right? Or kind of like drinking your own Kool-Aid. And this can go like one way that I see this come out a bunch is like, right, Fomalhaut is about like acting for the collective, and having your liberation tied up with everyone else's. And so if you're under the delusion that you are a separate self and that you need to just take care of yourself and F everyone else, like that is a delusion. Or think of Kamala Harris, who has has Fomalhaut on her midheaven. And, she could have ran a campaign that took care of other people, but instead she listened to a bunch of out-of-touch consultants and derided everyone who tried to be like, hey, care about trans people or Palestine. And look where we are now. Look where she is now. So it's the delusion that's like both self-delusion of like, I am the magic instead of like, the magic is all around us. But I think it's also the delusion of just like being too lost in the sauce, in the visions of things to the point where you need to actually bring them onto earth. They can't just be, you can't fritter away your time dreaming. You have to like, assent to making that dream a reality. Okay. And another big thing is the cycle of power. And I've probably emphasized this a ton. I'll keep emphasizing this, right? Power is not about some static state that you achieve, that you then cling to. Power is dynamic, right? And, Josephine McCarthy, the magician I mentioned before, has a great quote about power where she says, a common mistake people make when dealing with power is that they identify with it and take it on as a mantle. Eventually, as an aging adept, the work becomes a highly focused movement of or interaction with power that flows through a pure, inner, and very powerful instinct. We become a conscious part of universal power, right? So, what I love about the Royal Stars are just having my spiritual practice or something beyond me be part of like my personal journey is I don't need to get caught up in like feeling powerful all the time or feeling like I hold it. It's a continuum. It's something that I join, right? Just by facing the east and sunrise, I am channeling that universal power. It's about tapping into that flow bigger than you that also like that allows things to happen but also kind of checks and puts certain like boundaries on what you're doing, gives you something to hold on to. Right? So how to let both exist in a cycle, right? Our power and our powerlessness, because that's also a part of life. Certain times where all we can do is wait or surrender. So yes, as I said, the advantage to working with the stars is that we don't need to believe we are the possessor of power, only its steward. Um, And there's also something here too. It's like the more we can embrace both sides, like the more whole we can be. So this Carl Jung quote about yang, reaching its strength and becoming yin, to me is very much like the more we can embrace like our powerlessness when we are in that cycle, the more we allow our power to come back to us. The more we can like assent and hold our power when it does come to us, not run away from it. Then we allow the rest and the relaxation and the divine to come in and change things as well. And then we also waste less time criticizing ourselves for not feeling powerful all the time. Or, I mean, I know this is something I've struggled with of like, oh, like you should just be able to, impose your will on the world. That is power. But the more I try to chase that, the more weak I become. And I'll just say it like, your inner critic is not going to save you, right? Doing things from a place of uh, derision for the self or obligation is not what the royal stars are about. And that is so much of what like working with Aldebaran over these past few months has been for me is like, oh yeah, like how like why I act. Like, what is making me act? Whether, it be like just this sense of like alignment with the universe versus the part of me that's trying to guilt myself. Like that's really going to impact not just how I act, but how that action then progresses out in journeys. And similarly, power is change, right? It is not about staying the same. It is about moving with and harnessing the many cycles that come about, right? So Confucius, who is known for having a lot of commentaries on the I Ching, says to know the methods of change is to know the ways of the gods, right? There's something so powerful about letting yourself be transformed by your desires and the journeys it takes to get there. Right? And following the ways of the royal stars allows us to harness this cycle of change. And then, I mean, I love this Octavia Butler quote, right? All that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. Okay. And so finally, I am going to lay out this directional ritual that I have used to connect kind of broadly with the royal stars and also determine which one I maybe need to work with at this current moment. This is a taste of the sort of rituals and practices that I will get really into for each of the royal stars in my larger course. But this one is really simple because that's generally how I do rituals. All you really need is a compass, or at least just a knowledge of the directions from where you are, some sort of offering, and that can be a stick of incense, it can be a piece of food, it can be water, it can be plant material, just something that feels right and that feels, worthy of sharing, that shows your respect. And then you're going to want some sort of tarot deck or form of divination. So basically, it's a lot of the power of the ritual comes from moving. So you're going to start in some sort of center where you can kind of see each of the four directions. You can be inside, you can also be outside, um, and just start in the middle and just say this prayer. And it doesn't have to be this one. It's just one that I came up with. Great watchers of the directions, royal stars, please unlock and reveal my power. And then from there, you're going to approach each of the directions in order. So you are going to move towards the east. You can make it's, I've been the way Josephine McCarthy does her directional rituals, she often has you like kind of make a circle and then face the east. So if that feels good, it's sort of like you're weaving power together. You're making that circle and then face the east and then, change this prayer, to match each of the directions. So you say, Great Watcher of the East, Aldebaran, please unlock and reveal my power. Right? And then you go back, make a circle to the center. You do the same thing to the north with Regulus, and you say, Great Watcher of the North, Regulus, please unlock and reveal my power. Return to the center, go to the west. Great Watcher of the West, Antares, please unlock and reveal my power. Return to the center, face the south. Great Watcher of the South, Fomalhaut, please unlock and reveal my power. And then you're going to want to come back to the center. Take some time to settle in, meditate, contemplate, see if anything, any visions or thoughts or, any omens come up. And then you're going to use your divination method to kind of, draw a card or, roll a dice for each of the stars. And before that, just state your petition. You're saying, this is what I want to work on. This is where I am. This is what I want. Which of you can help me? And, depending on your divination, you can kind of like key in, the answers, like what sort of card you'd want to pull that is like, yeah, this is the one for me. Yeah, and then pull a card for each of the royals. And yeah, whichever one is most in alignment with your goals or feels most auspicious, that is then the path to work with. And yeah, honestly, like if you want like to work with a particular royal star, like you can't do wrong with just like facing the direction that they're in. Like if I like I have my own kind of set fixed star ritual, but for the royals, like I just like face the east and talk to Aldebaran. So like don't neglect like how these, how powerful just these cardinal directions can be. And hopefully, yeah, that can help you, yeah, begin to work through the royal stars, figure out which ones want to work with you, and yeah, tap into the power that is just like always there. Oh, I love this. The chorus of Kate Bush is literally just calling in the corners. Exactly. Just walk along listening to Kate Bush. Like whatever works for you, works for you. So now, time for questions, objections, concerns. This is, of course, leading into my larger Royal Star course. This is kind of like an introductory class. And then, for my next course, for my long course, we're going to get really deep on each of them, right? So for the first four classes, we're going to explore the royal stars from a theory perspective. What is their history, lore, and correspondences, as well as how they show up in the natal charts according to different placements. I'm giving you everything I know about the royals. Through much of my research and gnosis and how to delineate themselves. So if you want to begin like understanding your own chart with the royals or giving readings with the royals, then this information will be invaluable. And then in the second part of class, we will begin to apply this knowledge to begin walking the paths of the royals ourselves. I will explain the distinct paths of the royals and then getting into like how, how each Regulus path often starts with a journey. Fomal hot involves a lot of like surrender and letting go. I really want you to understand like this is what comes up when you work with Aldebaran, and that's normal if this phase comes up. And I will draw on the I Ching a lot for that as well. The I Ching is going to be heavily featured in this as well. I will, yeah, how they play out in action as well as how to draw down their magic so you can begin to walk with them. I'll keep saying this, like the stars want to be practiced with. It's one thing to have a theoretical understanding of what Antares is about. It's another to live it and embody it and truly know it in your bones. And that's what I want to impart with you, share everything that I've learned. So it's a bit easier for you, and you not only build relationships and learn about these powerful, beautiful stars, but you can begin to use them to change and improve your life. Class begins on November 4th. Sign up by the end of tomorrow to get early bird pricing on my website. There are payment plans available, so you pay a down payment and then there's, three uh, additional payments throughout the months. But yeah, I'm here for any questions. Also, if anyone here has any concerns and says, I don't know if this class is for me, and there's something about it that doesn't feel right, I want to hear that too. Right? Like I think of people who are like, oh, I, don't have any natal connections to the royal stars. Well, I think that you don't need it. I think that the stars just want to work with us. But yeah, any sort of questions or lingering things or anything, I am here to answer them. Take it as a compliment that no one is. Okay, let's see. Sarah, go for it. And you can do it in the chat or you can unmute yourself.
Figure it's easy to just talk. I want to know about kind of separating guilt from the whole rough side of the stars because there is this sense of like fate attached to them of like, oh, well,
Mhm.
if you go in the wrong direction, it could be the down. Like, there's the
Mhm.
repeated thing of you could lose everything that you gained. And I think it can be hard sometimes to like have things going on with these stars and look at those things and like not feel some kind of guilt because I feel like I lost years like really sitting in the poison of Antares. And
Mhm.
there's a part of me that's just like how do you like yeah, unshaming the fixed stars. Like how do
Mhm.
you kind of just, get out of the position of like I had no way of knowing that I was doing that. So I'm just kind of it's hard to put this into words. I feel like you get me.
Yeah, I do. And I just want to first say, I mean, I feel like you kind of just answered your question, like you couldn't have known, right? And I mean, this is right. Royal stars are like a niche within a niche within a niche. Like a lot of these things, and a lot of, I see, the royal stars play out so much, right? Particularly with like famous people who have it, and you see these downfalls and stuff. Like there, it's yeah. I don't think blame is yeah. I mean, I totally get why it's there, but. I the royal stars, and the gravity, like part of that is accepting that like messing up or like failing is in some way part of it. Like and that's not a deterrent. That's not you did something wrong. It's just something to learn from and to change with. Right? I mean, it just really feels like my spiritual practice. I've been practicing Zen for like over 10 years. And it's like every time I think I know what I'm doing and I'm a master at spirit and I'm meditating like a pro, universe comes in and like thumps me on the head. Like part of all of this journey is like accepting your limitations. And yeah, knowing that like as an Antares person, sometimes I do get really obsessive and it's destructive, but I'm still here. And that's honestly why I like I pray to Aldebaran and I'm like, can you help me with the things that I can't do? Right? Like the whole point of working with the Royal Stars is like it's not just us. Like we don't know everything. And if we can, cycle like our power with spirit, hopefully we'll deal with fewer of the pitfalls. But we can also maybe have more compassion and understanding for us. I mean, that is such a huge lesson that the stars teach me again and again is like thinking that I'm uniquely like bad or fucked up is first of all it's just not true. It's also not conducive to power. It's the real truth is that I'm trying my best. I am really powerful, and even though that comes with flaws and obstacles, like I am in alignment with the universe in the truth when I move for that. And it's like it doesn't matter when you started. If you are starting this journey now, like that is the perfect time. Right. And that's something that I love about Aldebaran too. Aldebaran's like, you want to start? Let's do it now. So yeah, I think that like that's even something you can ask them for help with. Like, especially if you have that around Antares. Like, hey, like I feel like you kind of like helped, like I was kind of in the midst of like the muck a bit. Can you help assuage me of that? Can you help me work with that? But just I think a lot of it is just like no blame because like it's not just you. It's not just you. And that's right, your power is given to them by them. Yes. Okay. Great. Ooh, so someone is saying Heliacal Rising is Mersims. I'm working to be a therapist and in writing capacity. I love that. I love that. I love Mersims, I'll just say as like a side note. It is like it's called the Announcer. It's in like the Canis Major constellation. And something I find with Mersims people is they're here to just talk and communicate. And they don't even need to know what they're saying, but they need to say it. And that's why it's like I bring up with the history of the royals and how it was, kind of this weird like error by some like French scholars. Like all of the stars are powerful. And if you give like any of the stars basically the same attention, like they will also, give you your own power and journey and special qualities. So it's really a matter of like time and attention. Um, Yes, control. Yes. And that's what's nice about working with the Royal Stars is you will continually be like, "Oh, right, I don't have control." I mean, that's why I like kind of laughed about having my laptop break is like, part of me could have been like, "Oh shit, how stupid of me. Like, I shouldn't teach this course, at 10 a.m. the next day." But it's like, "No, I have a responsibility. I am going to make it work." And I did. Let's see. Wow, thank you so much, Charlotte. I'm new to fixed stars, and it was nice to have this perspective. I am so happy. Let's see. I think it's no coincidence that interest in this exploding during this time. Exactly. I agree. Exactly. So, unless anyone else has any other questions or things they want to share, I will probably end this soon. At the very least, I'll get off this main screen. Well, thank you everyone for attending and taking the time. I hope you learned something. I hope you have some ideas and inspirations for your own work with the Royal Stars. And yeah, this will be uploaded to YouTube very shortly, so you will be able to replay it and view it anytime you want. If any further questions come up, feel free to put them in the comments below. But yeah, otherwise than that, I'll just stop my share and I'll hang up for a little bit. I'll hang up for a little